Hello, and welcome to Professional Correspondence, Letters, Memos, and Emails. Oh my! You're listening to part 1 of this lesson. Welcome to Professional Correspondence. In this presentation, we will talk a bit about letters, memos, emails, and lastly, we will talk about chat just a little bit. So most of these newer forms of communication in the workplace require that you state your point up front, that you keep it short, and that you use headings and lists to help people navigate and understand your points. And we'll go through some of these as examples moving forward. There are commonalities between all kinds of professional correspondence. Again, you need to give information quickly. And the information that you do provide should be relatively streamlined. You should use headings and bold and lines and other signs to let people know what the most important information is in each of the types of correspondence. For the most part, email and memos are a little less formal than letters are. While they may seem routine, they do require quite a bit of thought to put these together professionally. Remember that when you do send out email, whether it's internally or externally, you're representing not just yourself, but you're also representing your company. So it means that you should really think carefully before you metaphorically put pen to paper and send things out. Let's start off with letters. Letters are typically very formal. And they're also an official form of correspondence that companies send between companies or to other individuals for specific things. They often use stationery that has information about the company on it, as well as information about the sender. Here's an example of a letter. You can see down the left-hand side here, there are some notes that point back to the letter to give you more clarity about what the areas are. We won't cover this in detail because you have examples in your book, but in general, letters have an inside address and they'll also have an outside address, and you need to make sure that you have them both. In this case, with stationery, you have the company's address already laid out on the top of this particular letter. And then on the left-hand side, the inside address goes to the recipient. Letters will also have very formal phrases such as a formal salutation, dear. And at the bottom, you see they will have a formal closing, such as sincerely. The internal part of the letter or the body is where you get your point across. Letters have a lot of other kinds of conventions that you can look up as you need to. On the next page, there is some reoccurring information. There is going to be typically a date and the sender's name. So feel free to read more about letters as you move forward. In terms of a signature, letters have a very formal signature. You'll note that there could be 4 or 5 lines indicating the signature, and typically a letter is still signed by hand, or at least with a stamp that looks like it's been signed by hand. On to memos. Memos are typically for an in-house audience. That is to say that you send memos internally to get work done. Now, most industries have replaced memos with email, but there are still some industries that use memos exclusively. Those industries continue to use memos because they have inherent confidentiality. They can be filed in a cabinet where they cannot be reached, so they're more secure, and clearly they can be used as official records. They can be looked up, etc. When you're composing memos, you clearly still need to think about the rhetorical situation. Who is the correspondence going to? What is it they expect in the correspondence? What is it you expect them to do with it once they receive it? All those factors still are important in a memo. One of the rule of thumbs for memos, though, is that the tone is relatively formal. And especially if you're sending out a memo to someone who has more seniority than you or is above you in your company's structure, you want to be more formal. And you are typically friendlier to your colleagues or obviously to your friends. Memos themselves also have a subject line, and they should also be specific and clear. For the memo, you would state your purpose using topic sentences and as your main points when you begin your paragraphs. At the end of the memo, you typically initial them to let people know that it came directly from you, as they are normally in hard copy. And you also have annotations on the memos that tell people who else got copies. Here's an example of a memo. Again, we have notes on the left-hand side indicating in more detail what these areas mean. Right here in the middle, you can see where the memo was initialed. On the left-hand side, you can see the to, from, and date, which is also seen over on the email side. There's the subject line, which again needs to be specific. And as you see here, they're using headings to call out specific information in the memo. Sometimes memos are relatively long, and in fact, some organizations put reports inside their memos. So you should certainly find out how your organization uses memos as you move forward in trying to communicate using this format. When memos do have a second page, again, there will be a header that has information from the first page to let the reader know that there is more than one page. Next up is email. So email is the most predominant form of communication in industry today, mostly because it's quick, it's easy, and it's fast. So a few things to keep in mind. Think about topic sentences. You don't want to really sort of meander in your email. Most American emails start with the first line or the second line saying exactly what this email is about. It doesn't need to be eloquent. It doesn't need to be flowery. In fact, it's very common to see emails that say, I am writing you this email to request a meeting, or in this email, I'm going to give you a quote. So the bottom line with that is that emails are more straightforward. You want to always have a salutation, which is hello, dear, or hi, and you want to always have a closing, which sometimes can be sincerely or regards. These things help to let the reader know that you're starting the email and where it ends. And the salutation and the closing that you choose should indicate the tone of the email, whether it's formal, informal, or friendly, etc. Your subject line should be very specific. Think of what, why, and where as you construct these so that you can make something that alerts the reader to what's in the email. For example, if you're sending out something about sales information, you might want to say sales figures, that's the what. For the plant XYZ, that's the where. And why, you might say something like top performance. There's also a CC and a BCC available in email. The CC is for someone to receive a copy of the email. You only want to use CC and BCC for that matter when it's appropriate. Not every boss wants to get a copy of every single email you send out. In terms of BCC, there are really no good reasons to use it any longer. So think about what you're going to do with CC and sort of stay away from BCC. Lastly, the signature is one of those mandatory things. It lets people know where the email came from without them having to look into the header for the email. And it should contain at least your name, your phone number, your title, and your email address. As a student, you can use, a combination of those things. But as a professional, this is a standard. So there are a few things that I would like to discuss in terms of handling email. First and foremost, you need to think about the ethics of the situation as you send them, and that will probably help you avoid a number of uncomfortable situations. For example, avoid flaming. Flaming is when you bother to curse someone out in writing, in email, or in any other format, by the way. There is absolutely no reason to do so. Think to yourself, this is a record that someone will have on their server, on their laptop or computer or someplace. And there is really no good reason for that kind of flamboyant language to be kept on your behalf. So, bottom line with that, avoid writing down the bad things you need to say to someone. And if you really need to say that so-and-so is a blah, 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 I suggest you do it to their face. You should check your facts. Please be aware of distributing faulty or misleading information, because that will really get you in trouble. So before you spread rumors, be clear that they're either facts or that they're just rumors or whatever. Don't forward emails without approval. If you want to alert someone to some specific event, you can rephrase it, you can paraphrase it, but you shouldn't really formally forward someone's email without approval. Also, don't alter emails without someone else's permission. You can't take things away and add things to the email and then forward them. Emails should be easy to read. The subject line should be quite clear about what's going to be in the email. I often say to students that you really only should talk about one item in one email. You'd be surprised at how many people ignore the second or third item, even if you bother to list them. So even if you said in your email, I'm going to talk to you today about 3 things. The first thing, people still have a tendency to ignore anything more than the first thing. So make the subject line clear and state what that thing is, and then continue to talk about that one thing in the email. Try to keep your emails short. Limit them to essentially above the fold, which means 1 screen length of text. Anything longer than that, people wear out and stop reading them. If you're using them as invoices or as records, that's a different story. But in general, email for other kinds of reasons, you want to keep them short. No shouting or otherwise cursing out, like I mentioned earlier. And employ paragraphs. Now, paragraphs don't have to be 6 sentences long. Paragraphs can be short. They can be almost 1 or 2 sentences, so that people can see in between your thoughts what's going on in the email. And that's the idea. Delete any unnecessary emails that are stuck in a forward email chain. I'm sure you've seen them. If there's 20 emails in a chain and you're the next on the forwarding line and they're all attached to the back, they're probably irrelevant anyway. And if they are not, very few people are going to read down all the way through 20 different emails. You just send along the most relevant information, and that will cut down some of the clutter. Something to keep in mind. Anything sent using company email and their company email addresses should be professional. Don't send jokes. Don't send advertisements. Don't do those things, because the company essentially could come back one day and say that this was an appropriate use of email for that business purpose. So for your professional email, use your company's email address. And for your personal email, use your own email address. Everybody has them. Remember, email is a legal record, and companies can use those records to monitor, to trace, to record, and store them later. So don't do anything untoward in your email in particular. And for that matter, don't do anything untoward on the company's computer or at work, whatever untoward might be. Be sure to observe whatever netiquette is in your particular area. So for example, if you're working for a very large conglomerate and they have the 2 different types of signatures that go for either an external person receiving your email or an internal person receiving your email, you should observe that formality, right? And just in general, you want to respond as promptly as possible. Now, a lot of people may not think about this, but not everybody is sitting right here next to you in the state that you're in or in the same time zone. So keep that in mind when you are sending out emails, that just because it arrived in their email box on Saturday at 2 a.m., it doesn't mean that they're actually going to respond on Saturday at 2 a.m. They're going to respond when they open it and look at it, hopefully, or when they have time. Avoid any incessant reminders. If you need to remind someone about an email you sent, you can do so, but be aware of how much time you've given someone to respond before you start to bug them about it. Avoid any jargon unless it's germane to the job. You don't want to have to use a whole bunch of acronyms that people don't understand in your email only to have everyone be confused. Do include a signature block because it shows that it came from you, and it also tells the person how you would like to be contacted. For example, if you have a bazillion email addresses like I do, people always ask me, which email address should I send it to? Well, that question is answered. They can look at the last email that I sent them and use that email address. If I have given someone my cell phone, that will also be there. So your signature block, not only does it tell someone who it came from, but it also can let your readers know how you prefer to be contacted. Be professional. Include a salutation and a closing, like I mentioned earlier. Be concise, but not curt, and try to be as polite as possible. Talk to the person as if you were actually having a conversation by saying hello and exiting by saying goodbye, for example. Try to be safe and secure. Be wary of opening attachments that people didn't alert you to. Watch for things that look fishy. If you get some email from your company saying you need to reset your password, a simple phone call will clear up any kinds of those matters. Try not to reply to spam or to apply to places that give you spam. I know that's pretty hard, but be wary of where you stick your company email address because, you're just basically letting the entire spammer know what domain is active and they can just start spamming stuff out. Although most folks have good spam blockers, you still should be cognizant of the fact that it is a problem. Use good email passwords. Try to make sure that you keep your account secure. No company wants to have their records stolen because you used a password that was password. Back up your emails because being able to get back to your emails is very important. Most companies have some method for doing that, and you should inquire what that is. And if it's necessary, follow any rules about encryption. Avoid using email for the following items. Don't put your confidential or private information in your email. Should someone steal that information, they would then have that information. One good example I give to students is if you need to send someone confidential information, you might consider sending partially some of it in email and the other part of it in some other medium. For example, I used to run a number of labs and I had a number of technicians that would forget the logins and passwords for the administrative access at the labs. So I would email them the login and call them and give them the password, or email them the password and possibly text the login. So what that means is that they are not connected in email so that people can just strip that information out and get at that particular laboratory. If you have issues with someone, complain about a coworker or a boss for that matter, and you wish to file a grievance or you wish to get a raise or whatever it might be, don't use email for this. You can lead by saying, I'd like to speak to you about a matter, right? So you could write an email, say, for example, to a boss and say, can we please make time, maybe next week or whatever, to talk about an issue that I have about so-and-so. Boom. That's all you need to say. Putting any of that stuff in writing is a problem. I've heard of a number of instances where workers have been essentially let go for doing something of that nature, writing something like, well, if I don't get a raise, I'm going to quit. And the boss just simply interpreted that as a formal I quit notice, copied the email, printed it out, and took it straight to Human Resources and started the separation paperwork. You don't want to be that person. Again, avoid any emotion-filled conversations or arguments in email, as well as any back and forth emails. If you can't figure out what's going on, sending another email is not going to help. You're going to need to pick up the phone. So here is the anatomy of an email. Again, on the left, there are some notes that talk about how the email is used. And then in the middle is the format of the email. And you'll note that there's a to or from, a subject, and a CC. And you typically don't have a thing for attachments any longer. Depends on the types of systems that you use, but attachments show up as either a name for a file or as a paperclip, etc. if you do have them. And you can look more about email in some of the handouts that are available in the classroom, as well as the examples. On to IM, text, Twitter, etc. So text, Twitter, IM, they can be all lumped similarly into a category of short, very short parts or pieces of communication. However, while they may seem informal in some ways, if it is used or created by the company, it is still a legal record. I worked in a big organization that used IM to communicate amongst 150 help desk representatives. Those were legal records. Companies can monitor and trace and store that information. So the same things apply. Don't curse people out in text. Don't get overly emotional in that medium. When you use it, you'll have to get a feel for how they work. If you haven't used chat or text or IM before, the single sentences that are available when you type and hit enter can be a bit disconcerting when someone jumps in and talks in between you. But once you get familiar with how it works, it's relatively simple to participate in the conversation. So here are a couple tips for those things. Make it short, try to stay on one topic at a time, be as professional as possible, know the abbreviations you're going to use and don't use any unfamiliar abbreviations. Save all your logs so you can get back to that. Now, if you are using Twitter, for example, for business, please be aware Twitter is absolutely and positively public. So even though it looks like you're only talking to the people who you send it to, that's obviously not the case. So you want to be clear that the things that you do release can be tracked back. People can get back to that information, and that can be a problem. And you use hashtags and links to keep your Twitter stuff clear. Okay, that's all I have for emails, memos, letters, and IM. Thanks for listening.